Lisa Besserman, Managing Director over at Expa VC. So let's bring Lisa up to the stage and give everybody in the audience, throw them emojis up. Big round of welcome to Lisa Besserman over at Expa VC. Lisa, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. Yeah, I'm glad to have you too. We've just for everybody watching in the audience, Lisa and I know each other a little bit, and we've done a few events together. This is the first time we're actually going to get to do it one-on-one. So it's just going to be everything we're going to get to know about Lisa and Expa. I'm really excited for this conversation. So thank you again, Lisa. Let's dive in.
Right.
So you are the managing director over at Expa VC, but before then, you've actually been quite the journeywoman around the world, really. So I'd love to for you to tell a little bit about your background, what led you to Expa, and kind of the things that you've discovered and were able to do building communities in regions where startups weren't as recognized or the communities weren't yet established.
Sure. Yeah. I'm what I would call a recovering entrepreneur turned venture capitalist. So I've definitely seen both sides of the table. I understand the challenges as well as the opportunities. So my first entrepreneurial endeavor was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm originally from New York, although if I say Martin, you might think that I've spent a little more time in LATAM. But originally from New York, I got my start in the startup space running product and operations at an early stage startup in New York City. Did that for quite a few years. And then winter was coming for all of my Game of Thrones fans out there. And my lease was up in my overpriced Manhattan apartment. And I wanted to work remotely just to escape the New York winter for a few months. And my company obliged. We were a distributed team. We had, half of our dev team was in Silicon Valley, the other half in Europe. And I was in New York running operations. And so I wanted to work remotely. My company said I could go for a couple of months just to avoid that winter. And I looked at a map and I said, where is it warm? And where can I be in a similar time zone? And that's where I came down to Central and South America as the options. And so looked into places that I could potentially work, but also have a fun, work holiday adventure. And then came up with Buenos Aires, Argentina. I didn't speak a word of Spanish, didn't know anybody in the country, but it was meant to be a short-term adventure, a working holiday or a working remotely adventure, if you will. And I got down there and immediately fell in love with the city. I packed, my suitcase and my laptop, went down there. The plan was to be there 3 months. And when I got down there, I met just an incredible community of entrepreneurs, the most resilient entrepreneurs I'd ever met in my life, really incredible tech enthusiasts. But I noticed one thing very quickly, and that was that the landscape was incredibly under-resourced. So founders found it really difficult to raise financial capital. The community was very disjointed and fragmented. Companies like Google and Facebook and other companies that were looking at the rest of LATAM to do events or initiatives, they were kind of skipping over Argentina because it was a very challenging landscape in terms of political instability and macroeconomic climate. And so I, just fell in love with the city, saw just this incredible opportunity to build a startup community in Argentina. And through, hubris, naivete, sheer will, dedication, I wound up building an organization called Startup Buenos Aires. It was originally meant to be a place where founders can go to connect with one another, similar to the Founders Network, like founders helping founders type ethos. It was meant to be just a small side project, a way to just, maybe leave a little bit of an impact in the city before I left, help founders get resources, connect them with one another, and then maybe build small bridges to and from LATAM to other, more mature ecosystems for startup development. And I did this for a couple months and, validated the thesis. And then I realized that there was just this incredible opportunity for growth. Argentina is home to some of the most incredible entrepreneurs. And it was one of those moments in my life, like where you're at the crossroads and it was time to go back. It was, I was at the 3-month mark and it was time to go back to the States. And it was one of those times where it's like, if I go home, I might regret this for the rest of my life. If I stay and I fail, which is probably likely because 90% of startups fail and I didn't know what I was doing and I was in a foreign country. But if I fail, at least I'll have a great time failing. I'll learn a ton in the process and I'll be able to go back to New York at any point in time. But I was very lucky that an incredible team and community came behind me and were able to mobilize the organization. We wound up pivoting to become an early stage startup accelerator. We were one of the first startup accelerators in Argentina. This is back in 2012. So accelerators weren't as ubiquitous as they are today. And so we built this early stage startup accelerator, which provided education, community, resources, access to financial capital to entrepreneurs throughout LATAM, specifically in Argentina. But then in addition to those resources, we also built bridges and served as a conduit to Argentina from the States, and brought a lot more initiatives, opportunities, funding to the region. And so I was able to build that out, did that for about 5 years. So what was supposed to be 3 months turned into 5 years in Argentina. Met just really some fantastic people in that time. And I was able to scale the organization. I was very lucky. We wound up working very closely with the government, other partners like Uber and Facebook and WeWork and other companies that were looking to have a presence in Latin America. And we helped to be their partner and their boots on the ground. And then after about 5 years, I was ready to move back to the States. And I was very lucky that the government was looking to put more resources into entrepreneurship. The national administration was betting on entrepreneurship, and they wanted to build a public incubator program. So I was very fortunate that we were able to work out an acquisition deal with them. And I transitioned Startup Buenos Aires from a private accelerator to work with them to build a public incubator to provide financial capital, equity-free financial capital to founders in Argentina, as well as an educational component to support entrepreneurs in the region.
That's fantastic. So I feel like you've seen it all from at least at that point.
When it comes to accelerators, I've seen it on the private side, I've seen it on the public side. And then when I moved to Austin, where I currently am, I was recruited to run Indeed's incubator. So Indeed is the world's largest job site, and I built and ran their corporate incubator program. And so then I saw incubation and acceleration on the corporate side, and then now I switched over to the venture side. So I've certainly seen different iterations and lots of really great ways to accelerate startups and work with them in a myriad of opportunities as well.
Yeah, all right. So before I get into what you're working on right now, I mean, obviously, again, you started like grassroots, like really working with startups, building just the communities from the ground up. You got buy-in from government organizations that were helping kind of fuel a lot of that to continue economic development. Then you bounced over into corporate, doing that from like an inside standpoint. Like without having like picked too much of a favorite, like what was kind of the most exciting one, at least bucket out of that?
To be honest, what I'm doing now is my favorite. I like being on the venture side because I loved being an entrepreneur. I'm what I would call an accidental entrepreneur, a phrase I thought I coined until I Googled it like years later and saw there was like hundreds of thousands of hits. But I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I was never one of those kids that had a lemonade stand or aspired to be an entrepreneur in my adulthood. But I saw a problem and I was crazy enough to think I could build a solution. And in that process, I accidentally became an entrepreneur. So there were a lot of elements of entrepreneurship that I loved, like the passion, the grit, the tenacity, the hard work, the dedication. There was a lot I didn't. I never really felt truly comfortable in living in that instability, not knowing if I was going to be able to pay my employees, not knowing if I was going to be able to pay my rent. I loved a lot of elements of entrepreneurship, but I never truly felt comfortable doing it. Corporate was great. I learned a lot. I truly Indeed was one of the greatest places I've ever worked, but being on the venture side, I think is the best of all worlds because I have the stability of being in venture. I know I'm going to have a paycheck. I know I have health insurance, but I also get to work so closely with early stage founders and entrepreneurs that I get to be a part of that building and a part of that, that grit and that hard work. And I get to see that firsthand. So I feel like it's a really comfortable way to make an impact. So for me, it's really being on the venture side that I appreciate the most.
Oh, I love that. I love that. If you have questions for Lisa, please drop them in the chat. Our production team behind the scenes are going to bring them up to me, and I'll read some of the best ones out loud. Can't get to all of them, else we'll be here all night. But please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible. So as you mentioned, you love working in venture right now. So tell us a little bit more about Expa. Tell us a little bit about kind of where it started, what's it focusing on right now, and maybe some of the companies that you're working with already that are really exciting you.
Sure. So Expa, we are an early stage venture fund, but we're also a venture studio. So we were founded by Garrett Camp, who is the founder of Uber. I'm sure all of us here are familiar with that small little startup, Uber. And he was also the founder of StumbleUpon. And so he built Expa in 2013 originally as a venture studio, similar to an incubator where they built companies in-house, scaled them, and so on. And then a few years later, they decided to go the more traditional venture route or incorporate that into the platform. And so now we also invest in early stage startup, primarily pre-seed to Series A. So in addition to, we still have the venture studio, we're still a VC of builders, by builders, for builders, but we also have that traditional venture investment arm. We are agnostic, so we're a generalist fund. We invest anywhere from aerospace to fintech to climate tech to SaaS, all across the board. For us, it's really investing in the founders and the problem space rather than a specific vertical or sector.
Awesome.
We have quite a robust portfolio, but I'd say some that come to mind. We recently invested in a company called Farm. And so they're a climate investment platform. They have a community-powered tool for investing in undervalued land assets. And the goal is to significantly reduce carbon emissions. So it's just a really beautiful mission. Another exciting startup we have is called Detect. And I hope everybody remembers this one because what they do, they're a diagnostic company. And they developed an accurate and affordable molecular COVID-19 test to give everyone access to PCR lab accuracy. And those are available online depending on when you check the website because they sell out in like 6 minutes. But I'm hoarding my Detect COVID tests, of course. Another one that's really interesting is called Prometheus. They've created a zero net carbon fuel. So their product actually pulls CO2 and water from air, and it combines it with electricity from solar and wind power to produce zero net carbon gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. So that's really interesting. And then on the mental health side, which is an area that I'm quite passionate about, we've recently invested in an early stage startup called Chill Pill. They haven't launched yet. They're going to launch in a few months. And they're a mental health platform for Gen Z women. So big mixture of like climate, aerospace tech, fintech, SaaS, all the cool things.
That's awesome. Yeah, again, across the board. I love the fact that you'll have the ability to really cross a spectrum in this variety of different verticals, hold different kinds of sectors, and really make impact in those areas. Whereas again, in traditional firms, they're really centric to maybe just one region or one specific vertical of industries. So it's really unique what y'all are doing over there. So now we know a little bit about Lisa. Let's learn a little bit about what's great for a founder, maybe somebody who's in the audience right now that wants to talk to somebody but you don't even know how to get in touch with you. There's certainly good ways of doing it. There's some really unique ways to really kind of separate yourself from the pack. There's certainly ways to definitely not do it. But in your perspective, in your experience, what have been some pretty solid standard or best practices for founders that are maybe starting that first pre-seed round? They've gotten through the angel, friends and family kind of round. They need to start building their circles. They need to build that investor pipeline. What are some good ways for them to set themselves apart, but also ensure they're not running afoul of any etiquette things that they're still learning on the fly?
Sure. I would say that the first rule of thumb or the first suggestion is warm intros go a very, very long way. So if there's some way that you can be connected to a certain VC or investor that you're interested in, I would say absolutely scout your LinkedIn, see who your second and third degree connections are, and try to get that warm introduction because that has a lot of weight to it. Another thing I say is really important is to ensure that there's alignment. So whether it's in the thesis of the VC, the stage that they invest, or the value that they can add to your startups, relationships should always be mutually beneficial. And it's really important to understand that when you're reaching out to VCs, make sure that they're actually investing in your space. Check out their portfolio, understand the stage that they invest in. Because if you're an early stage startup and you're going to a late stage investor, it's really not the best use of your time or their time. And it might actually provide a missed opportunity in the future when you are at that stage. So I'd say do your due diligence. But I also tell portfolio companies that due diligence is a two-way street. It's important that you're doing diligence on the investor, and it's not just about who can write a check. It's who can be the right strategic partner, not just the financial partner, who can help you scale, who can help you make introductions, who can provide those resources, and also most importantly, who's going to be there when the time gets tough. And so for founders that are looking to take payment or take financial capital from investors, I always say, don't only talk to the portfolio companies that are succeeding, talk to the portfolio companies that have failed and see how those investors reacted in those tough times. Because an investment, when you're dealing with venture investment, it's a marriage. You're in it for the long haul. And so I'd say, the tips are, warm intros, making sure that there's alignment, and then also doing your diligence on the investor, on themselves.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I see this often, with our work with Founder Institute. I've been with the organization running our Texas programs for the last 5 years. Just recently joined our headquarters as our entrepreneur in residence. And first-time founders don't realize that. They really are getting into a marriage. It's a long-term relationship. It's not just going to be transactional and you set it and forget it. It's, you're going to be with them for a long time. They're going to be with you. Yeah. So you really need to understand that and manage your expectations before you start trying to dive into those relationships, just like you would in real life.
And do your homework. It's really important. We get so many startups that we just don't invest in that sector, or it's just a much later stage than we're usually investing in, and it's just not a great use of your time. So make sure you do the homework before you do the outreach, I'd say.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned a little bit about what not to do, but has there been anything that's ever really stuck out at you? It's like, wow, they really shouldn't have done that. Maybe something that might be good for somebody in the audience. We're already sitting.
Yeah. I've got a few of those.
People in the audience right now.
One of my pet peeves is when I get a cold outreach email, which is totally fine. We've invested for plenty of cold outreach emails, but the emails don't include the deck. It's like, let's schedule a call, or email me back if you want my deck. And it's like, well, you have one shot. We get 50 cold emails a day. So really, if you want to have them look and give consideration, and we look at every single deck that we received, send the deck in the first email. Don't leave it on to the investor to follow up to get that information from you. So I'd say one of the do's and don'ts is don't forget to add the deck, especially if it's a cold outreach. Another thing that I see sometimes is in the deck, they don't include how much they're targeting to raise. So, a lot of times with VCs, they're either early stage or late stage, or they might have different, principals or associates that are targeted on the pre-seed versus the seed. So sometimes it just needs to be routed to the right person. So it's really important to include your funding amount so people know, if it's a good match for the fund. This is a rookie error, but don't CC all of your targeted investors in one email. We've been in emails, cold emails with just a list of investors, and we're just that just doesn't feel great.
It's a little spammy.
It's quite spammy, yes. And you're not going to get the response that you'd like in that case. And then the last thing, and this pretty much goes without saying, but don't lie. We do diligence. It's not great. VC and investment is so relationship based. You want to have that trust from day one. And if you start off on the wrong foot, one, we'll probably find out. And two, you might burn that bridge, and it's just not worth it. So always be honest and upfront in all stages of your communication with your potential investor.
That's fantastic. Very concise too. I hope people in the audience are really getting some good tidbits, because I'm learning a lot right now myself. I'm going to transition a little bit. You talked about some of the things that you're already doing and investing in over at Expa, but as you look to say 2022, we're just 2 weeks in, less than that into the new year. It's already been a whirlwind, just like it has been the last few. Is there anything that you're seeing already, maybe from some of the emails and then the startups that are coming out, or really maybe it's not stuff you have looked at traditionally that are really starting to excite you?
Yeah, there's 2022. It's crazy. It's already 2022. Where did the time go? But I'd say a few sectors that we're starting to see really big trends and emergence in the venture space is one of them would be climate and energy tech. So, the UN climate change conference, I believe that was in Glasgow, that showed us that politicians are willing to support improvements in energy transition and climate change. They just need to lean on tech to do so. So climate and energy tech entrepreneurs actually have a really wonderful opportunity to build companies that can make real impact and help us meet the world's ambitious net zero targets. And if you match that with the investment community that are looking more closely at ESG policies, you have the ideal mix for more investment dollars flowing into climate and energy tech, especially this year. And there's been a launch of a dedicated ranking of investors in the sustainable energy transition. It's called the Climate 50 this year, and that's even more evidence of the gathering momentum in that space. So that's one space that I think we're going to see a lot of startups emerge in at the early and late stage. Next is I mean, this is pretty obvious, but healthcare. The trends precipitated by the pandemic for health tech entrepreneurs are going to continue, as national health services continue their focus on pandemic prevention and treatment. And similar to the future of work, which is also another one that I'll touch on briefly, the way that health services are provided has been forever impacted by the pandemic. And startups that focus on areas such as like remote patient management or are working to remove frictions for research and drug discovery, they're particularly well positioned to benefit from more funding and less inertia. So that's another space I think we're going to see a trend in. Third is fintech. Like financial services was the leading sector for venture investment in 2021. I believe there was over 134 billion invested with like almost 200% year-over-year growth. So that in itself is, I think that'll continue. There's this desire for personal financial stability and security amidst all of the economic uncertainty that's unfolding in the world right now, unfortunately. But I think we'll see more B2B payments being digitalized, BNPL, like the buy now, pay later platforms. And then I expect to see innovation in the infrastructure layer as well, and consumer tech and business payments. And then not to mention, of course, growth in investing in crypto assets. So I think they're going to, like the investments and the financial services, fintech will continue to be a leading sector for early and late stage investments in 2022. And then the last is one of my favorites, coming from Indeed. I've seen it, as we were building new products at the start of COVID is the future of work. There's been a very obvious tectonic shift in how, where, and why we work over the past 2 years or almost 2 years. And it's no surprise that the future of work has a huge potential to be a major area for investment this year. And the next generation of HR tech startups will create richer methodologies to measure top talent, both at the hiring and across the employee development experience lifecycle. And then that also, you have to consider the creator economy. As the creator economy considers to grow, and it shifts our cultural mindset, and workers are redefining their definitions of work and career, and there is market validation that a sustainable living can be made as a creator. So I'd say those are my top few, like climate and energy, healthcare, fintech, and future of work.
Oh yeah. Again, I have a feeling like a lot of these things are just, we're going to see not only that, but even more discoveries in these fields. I learn something every day talking to founders that are really exploring this space. We got a couple that are tackling a lot of stuff in environmental sustainability that we're going to be presenting a little bit later here in the evening. So thank you again. We're going to change it up a little bit and get some questions from the audience. We've been getting so many. We're sitting at about 330 plus people here. Thank you if you're just joining us from the start of the event. My name is Martin. I'm the Entrepreneur in Residence for Founder Institute. I'm joined over with Lisa Besserman, Managing Director over at Expa VC. And we're going to take some questions now from you. We got a few. We're going to try and go through these rapid fire as much as we can, and then once we'll wrap here, we'll get into the presentations for the evening. Thank you again.
One thing to mention also, if we can't get to some questions and you guys want to connect, feel free to tweet me. It's just my name at Lisa Besserman. Happy to connect offline as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure our production team will drop that too. Follow us all on Twitter. It's an easy way to get in touch with VCs. I've seen it firsthand for many founders. Twitter is a strong conduit of communication. Just engage. We'll start with our first question. So Sohail really resonated with those cold outreach emails and making sure you have the good information in there. Sohail asked, what are some key data points to include, maybe not necessarily in a deck, but maybe in bullet points that's going to make that investor open the pitch deck? Is there anything that you love looking at that's already going to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to see what's up with this attachment?
I mean, to be honest, we look at every single deck, and a good investor will look at every deck. I kind of skim the body, if I'm being completely honest. So, I mean, you can incorporate some data points in terms of like how big the TAM is, any traction you have. Also, like what stands you out. Like that's the most important when investors are choosing their investments. It's not necessarily the product they're investing in; it's the person. So, if there's a reason that or whatever it is that might set you apart or position you to be the founder and you to be the person to solve this problem, I would say focus more on that and the story, because that'll catch the attention of the investor. But always include the deck. Please always have the attachment.
Yeah, always have that there. Always have that there. So good. I hope that was helpful. Surali is also asking, how did you get from building a community to becoming an organization? Like, was there like a process of just, all right, now we've got so many people, how do we standardize this a little bit? How do we actually turn this into something that is like whole?
No, that's a great question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I started Startup Buenos Aires, the first meeting was 12 founders in my friend's living room sitting there. And that's essentially like what I aspired it to be. I'm like, okay, it's like a small little grassroots club. And then really what changed the trajectory of the organization is the community mobilization. More people found out about it. We were doing something altruistic. We were providing resources and asking for nothing in return. And in fact, that's one of the best pieces of advice I ever received from a good friend of mine, Andrew Hyde. He was the founder of Startup Weekend. And, at one point I asked him, like, how did you become so successful? It's incredible. He's like, I do good things for people and ask for nothing in return. And that's essentially like what the ethos and the mission of Startup Buenos Aires was. It was help founders and ask for nothing in return and just pay it forward. And so for us, we didn't plan on being this major organization. We had no idea what an accelerator was at the time. We knew we wanted to help people, and that resonated with people. And so they spread the word. We helped people. They wanted to help us. They wanted to provide resources. People were asking for resources. So it was really about kind of connecting the dots, synthesizing the data, and like solving a real problem. And then from there, we were just really like very lucky in the way that we scaled. But it was really just doing good things and asking for nothing in return, and enabling a community to get behind the vision and the mission. And so a lot of that had to do with like building a volunteer team, having the right marketing and positioning, building communities like grassroots. Like we went to events, we built a Facebook group, we built a forum. So we made it, we reduced the barriers to entry and tried to make it as frictionless as possible for people to be a part of what we were building. So it wasn't an exclusive community. It was incredibly inclusive. And because of that, and because it was built like that from day one, it enabled more and more people to be a part of it. And then because of that, we were able to community mobilize that.
That's awesome. It reminds me a lot of when we were starting Founder Institute in Texas. We have about 500 active members that are mentors, grads, partners. And there was never really like an immediate like, oh, this is when it changed. It just grew, and then we figured out ways to coalesce a lot of those things with those nodes that you mentioned. These little hubs to communicate and bring people together. So that's awesome.
Well, one thing I want to mention is that it wasn't all like candy canes. Like, I mean, we didn't have a business model. Like I invested my life savings into building this without any idea of how we were going to monetize. The first iteration was like, oh, we would survive off of corporate sponsorships, because I saw that work in the States. That didn't translate to LATAM. There just wasn't that budget in the LATAM groups to provide that financing. And so we were at like a really rough point where like my team was split, because we realized we're running out of runway. We're just living off of my investment at this point, which wasn't much. And, our assumed business model just didn't work. We couldn't validate it. And so half the team wanted to start charging to be a part of the community. And the other half, and I was against it. I was like, we started this because people didn't have access to resources. We can't charge them. It's just not, it goes against our entire mission. And so we were able to find like a business model within that, and it was leveraging technology. So we recognized that Argentina had really incredible developers and designers and programmers, and the cost of them were at a fraction of the cost of the US. Like you can get 3 Argentine devs for the cost of 1 in the US. And so what we did was we essentially created an agency model and connected dev shops and like tech studios in Argentina to build technology for companies in the US who are looking to outsource or offshore or hire augmented staff solutions. So for us, it was, it wasn't easy. There were a lot of like challenging moments and a lot of times where we almost shut our doors. But I always like to say, like, it's easy to talk about the success, but there was a lot of failure along the way and a lot of missteps. But staying true to the mission is really important. So it's really about like being rigid in your vision, but flexible in your execution.
Awesome. So yeah, when we're just about out of time. At least I would know you and me could talk here for probably hours, hours and hours and hours. But I know we have some founders that I know you're excited about seeing, and some a great panel that's going to help give them feedback. So I want to leave with one last just thought from you before we let you go for the evening. For the founders, aspiring entrepreneurs, and even maybe some of the investors or people that are looking to invest and don't really even know where to start. What's a great first step to just get going? Be it if you are a founder trying to start a company, or you're looking to get involved in entrepreneurship and supporting them from an investment standpoint. What's like a good first step for any of them?
I would say, there's two very different paths. I'd say for the founders, my one piece of advice for founders just starting out is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Make sure you're building something because you absolutely love the problem, not because you think you have a solution and you're trying to find the problem. It's not going to work. That would be my advice to entrepreneurs, like marry the problem, date the solutions, figure out what solution works. My advice to investors or people starting funds or, people, first-time angels, it's figure out how to add real value. This day and age, like capital is commodity, like there's so much cash everywhere. It's really not about writing a check and waiting for that return on the investment as it might have been historically. Right now, it's about how can you add the most value to your portfolio, whether it's through introductions, whether it's through human resources, whether it's through support and guidance and advising. So I'd say, like, don't just write a check and wait for it to return. You have to be a part of the journey with the founder in good times and in bad.
Love it. That's fantastic. We are out of time. I know. I hope I can bring you back for more of these.
Anytime. Yeah, you guys have been great. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.